Sound.
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 Sound. Sound.
Sound.
Found in sound.
When you think of ocean sounds, you may think of the crash of waves, the call of gulls, or, beneath the surface, the songs of whales. Rarely do you think of fish making sounds, besides the occasional splash. However, most people would be surprised to know that many species of fish do make a variety of sounds to communicate. Xavier Mouy is a marine biologist, acoustician, researcher, and musician who now works in the U.S., but started his expeditions studying fish sounds on Vancouver Island, developing an underwater autonomous video camera and audio recording system that was first deployed just north of Nanaimo in Nanaimo Bay in 2018. Xavier grew up in France and completed a Bachelor of Science, specializing in the theory of acoustics, vibration, and signal processing, thus learning the physics of sound, how to measure it, and how to use it. The study of acoustics complemented his passion as a musician, and his interests included how to hone the acoustics of concert halls and classrooms, as well as reduce the vibrations of vehicle traffic in buildings. He went on to complete a master's in oceanography in Quebec.
And that's where I discovered that acoustics could be applied to underwater acoustics. And here, that was like a master's in oceanography, so pretty broad as well in a very different fields. But my research focused on using sound to monitor blue and fin whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And mostly, how can we use the sound they produce to detect where they are, with the end goal of trying to reduce ship strikes, for example, of all the shipping going in the St. Lawrence. That was quite a pivot in my career, because that's really when I realized that I wanted to work in underwater acoustics. So apply kind of all the theory I've learned to protect and understand the marine environment.
From there, Xavier worked at a consulting company in Halifax for 14 years, where he was monitoring the impacts that underwater noise levels from oil and gas work and ship traffic have on marine life. In 2016, he went back to school to the University of Victoria and completed a PhD on Earth and Marine Sciences.
Basically, I focused on how to use sound to monitor fish. Basically, when I was working in industry, I found a lot along the west coast of Canada that there are a lot of sounds that were really intriguing, but that were not from whales. And talking to several researchers, I identified that those sounds were actually from fish, but no one could tell me which species they were from. And so that really triggered my interest. And I kind of realized it was a tricky problem. But if we can identify species to sound for fish, then we can just listen to the ocean and try to find out what species are there, what they're doing, and so forth. So I was thinking kind of the huge potential it could have. So I did my PhD on this, and specifically on that issue of putting methods together to identify species and behavior to specific sounds that we record in order to be applied for marine conservation and fisheries management.
The discovery and study of fish sounds is not actually a new science, and Xavier says he works with researchers who have been in the field for over 30 years. However, it's only recently that interest and funding has increased.
It was basically ignored, and people didn't really believe that fish were making sounds and that it could be useful. And so those people, huge admiration for them, because they kept their motivation despite the lack of funding and interest. But now it's booming, because people actually now, because of this important work that they've done, they show that it actually is very important and can be very impactful.
Researchers use an underwater microphone called a hydrophone to study underwater sounds. Hydrophones come in various sizes and can be configured in different arrays depending on what sounds are being studied.
And you can use one hydrophone, and with this you can just detect or identify the sounds that are around you. But you can also use multiple hydrophones. And with multiple hydrophones, what it makes, it's actually can have more information about the environment. One of the key information you can get is localization, so where the sound is coming from. An analogy I like to take is, if you close your eyes and you could listen around you, Like, you can detect like if there are birds around you or a car passing by or a baby crying or something. But also because you have two ears, the sound arrives like at a slightly different times between one ear and the other. And so your brain uses that information to actually tells you where the sound is coming from. So you have a pretty good like spatial information about like where the sound comes from. So we humans are doing that all the time, but we can kind of use the same principle in the water with several hydrophones. And the more hydrophone you have and the more precise location you can get. We have like very sensitive hydrophone these days. But also it really depends on like how loud the what you're studying is producing sound, and also the background noise that is around you. For example, blue whales, they produce low frequency sound that are really loud. Low frequency travels very far. Typically, you can detect like blue whale calls for up to like 100 kilometers or sometimes even more when it's like the perfect conditions. But if you have a ship coming by just right by the hydrophones, it's going to be so loud that it's going to, what's called masking, it's going to mask the sound from the blue whale or any sound source. And then it's going to basically shrink the area over which you're listening. So it's very variable in time because of like how the noise fluctuates in the ocean, and fluctuates with like how loud the calls are. So typically blue whales, fin whales are making sound that are pretty loud that can travel large distances, but fish, for example, are not as loud, and it depends on the species, but you can detect from like 10 meters to up to kilometers if you have like a school of fish chorusing at the same time.
Wait, did you just say fish chorusing?
So there's some species of fish, and I think those were the groupers in the Caribbean. They use sound to as a mating display during the spawning, and so they gather into large, like very dense schools, and the chorus they make sounds all at the same time. Usually that's the males that are producing the sounds, but the females use the characteristic of the sound to select their mate. So I'm thinking in like there's a fish, a different fish like the plainfin midshipman that we can find on Vancouver Island. They produce this chorus, and they kind of it's a long tone. The frequency and the duration of the tone is related to how fit the male is. So if you have a strong male, basically it's going to call for longer than a less fit male, and the frequency also will be higher for male that can basically contract their sonic muscles very fast, and mean they're strong enough. Like, and the females will basically choose the males based on the information of that call and choose the most fit male. So there's a really important goal into emitting those sounds.
Wow. Because you think they're choosing like by sight or some
Right.
other sense, but not sound. Like that's incredible. If he was out in the air, what how loud would that be?
It's hard to compare, and I'm always a bit careful about comparing with air because you measure sound levels using like decibels. The way decibels are calculated in air and in water are done differently. So if even if you use the same number, they don't mean the same thing. So I'm always a bit careful about comparing levels in air and water. But to give you an idea, I think in the plainfin midshipman is a really good example because they live in deep water for most of the year, and then when it's time to spawn, they go back close to the coast in very shallow water, and there's lots of them at the same place. So kind of the sound accumulates, like kind of cocktail party effect. Kind of you have many people in the same room getting really loud. And here that was so loud that actually people that have houses close to the water were woken up at night by the sound because actually that was so loud that it would you could hear them outside of the water. And so people were like really intrigued by like what was making this sound always at the same time at night during I think that was like March, April. And there was like all kind of theories. But finally they find out that yeah, it was actually the midshipman that was chorusing
Wow.
during the mating season. And those sounds were so loud that you could hear them from the surface, and that would wake up people at night, which is quite amazing.
How do you link the sound with the fish? So
Yeah.
Because you hear a
So
sound and then you're like, someone dives down and there's the fish.
right. And when I started that, I say, well, like it's easy. Because like I used to work on whales, and like whales, you can't take them and put them in aquariums like blue whales, like they're like 30 meters long and many tons. So I think like I mean like fish, we can take them, put them in tanks, and record them. And that was a bit naive of me to think that, because actually it's very tricky. Because like well, fish, they don't like to be taken out of their habitat, understandably. So even if you put them in tanks, well, they're not in their natural habitats. Even if they produce sound in the wild, then they might not produce sound in tanks. Sometimes fish like produce sound, as I was mentioning before, during like specific events, like for spawning or things like that. So if you put them in tanks and there's no other fish around, or if it's not the good time of the year, then maybe they will just not produce sound because it's not the right context. But sometimes it has actually led to interesting studies. So it works for some species. But there's another challenge here, is that when you record sound in a tank, the propagation like of sound is really tricky. The sound bounces on like all the boundaries on the walls of the tanks. And if you have echoes like interfering with each other, it can kind of cancel out or build up to some frequencies. So basically it distorts the sound. So what you record might actually be quite different from what you would find in the natural environment. So the way I tackled that is try to basically do all the measurements in the field and in the fish's natural habitat. And that requires like hydrophones. So we need to listen to what's in the water. It needs like we need to see what's going on. So we need like video cameras. But it's not all. It's necessary but not sufficient. Because basically if you hear something and you see a fish in the front of the camera, there's actually nothing that tells you that the fish that produces the sound is behind you or behind the field of view of the camera. So you need to have to do the localization. So you need to have several hydrophones. And so what I came up with is like 3 different types of instrumentation that have several hydrophones and several video cameras. So basically you put this instrumentation in the ocean. With the several hydrophones, you can localize precisely in 3 dimensions where the sound is coming from. And then you have video cameras that are looking like recording. And so you see, okay, at that location, what was present? And then you can identify the fish and sometimes the behavior of the sound source. Now, there's different ways to, like, I mean, there's many different habitats and constraints like in the marine environment. So I put like 3 different platforms together. One is like, basically, you have 6 hydrophones and 2 cameras that you put on the seafloor. It's about like 2 meters by, it's a cube of 2 meters on each side. So it's relatively big. And you put it on the seafloor and you let it record for a couple of weeks. Then you retrieve the data and you can do the localization, the cameras, and identify those fish sounds. It is the platform that kind of provides the best localization because you have 6 hydrophones. So that gives you a lot of information. But it's quite big to deploy and it's not appropriate for all environments. So there's another platform that kind of uses the same principle, but much smaller. Like it uses one camera that kind of looks horizontally with 4 hydrophones, and it's I don't know, it's like a meter wide. So you can deploy it, same thing on the seafloor, but it's easier to handle. You can have divers that put it on the seafloor. And it's better to look at more like rocky bottom where it's less stable because it's much smaller platform. And then the last platform is to basically not observe fish like statically, like you don't put things and leave them there for 2 weeks, but actually be dynamic. So I put like 4 hydrophone on an underwater drone, like a remotely operated vehicle, like something small that actually fits in my backpack. But basically here, you can't record like for 2 weeks at a time, but you can, for a few hours, you can actually pilot this little vehicle and actively look for fish that are of interest, so between crevices or much smaller fish. And then as you find some, you can sit on the bottom and listen to them. And then once you've done your measurement, that you can move somewhere else. So So 3 different kind of platforms that are you can measure and identify fish sounds in different environments.
What is the strangest sound you've heard in the hydrophones? Is there something you heard that you were just like, oh, is this mermaids or what's?
So the interesting things about having video cameras along with your hydrophones is that you can finally identify what like some of the strange sounds that I've recorded. For many times, like over several years, like I hear some sounds like of something squishing, like or pulling on my hydrophones and kind of rubbing sound. And of course, it's hard to know what it is. Could be anything. But now that I had the cameras, I was able to see that many of those sounds were actually from seals. Like seals, like the harbor seals, they would come and they would basically try to tear apart my hydrophones and like pull on them and on cables and then bump on the camera and stuff. So that was one of the sound that I finally was able to identify. That was kind of a funny thing to
Nice.
see.
Yeah, you haven't heard talking or anything
I
over
haven't
the
heard
water. No,
talking, no,
okay, that's good.
but like there, when you're looking at data collected in the ocean, there's many sounds that we actually don't know what they are. So it's quite usual to record sound that we have no idea what they could be. So there are many different mechanisms of sound production in fish, and different species will produce sound differently. One of the most common is to vibrate the swim bladder. So the swim bladder is kind of a pocket of air, if you will, like in the fish that they use for floatability. They can adjust the depth at which they are. But some fish have what they call like sonic muscles. So they're muscles that are attached to the swim bladder. Their whole purpose is to like contract rapidly and make this bubble basically vibrate. And that's using these that they make these either the thumps or like knocking sound or like grunts. It's not like tonal like dolphin whistles or something, or at least not often. It's always like a succession of pulses. So that's one way that is very common. But there are many different ways. Some fish use stridulation, so they move bones, fish bones against each other, and that creates some pulses. A good example is seahorses. They have bones on their um, skull that they can clap together, and that makes this impulsive sound that they use to communicate. There's some funny mechanism too. I think one of the very popular one is for herring.
Every year in early spring, herring gather to spawn and slowly migrate along the shores from Comox to south of Nanaimo, with females laying eggs on seaweed and kelp, and males fertilizing the eggs and turning the surrounding ocean a milky turquoise. The herring bring a flurry of activity with them, as marine mammals, larger fish, seabirds, and fishing boats follow the herring schools down the coast. Millions of eggs wash ashore, dotting the beaches like glittering diamonds.
For herring, the swim bladder is connected to the digestive system, and that can basically go out through the anus. And so when they're contracting, basically the air can come out and basically they fart. And the bubbles that are releasing are making some ticking sound. There's a really funny story during the Cold War that in Sweden they were recording very strange sounds that they thought were from Soviet submarines, and they were pretty sure the sound they were recording using Navy hydrophones were from like Soviets trying to spy on Swedish waters. But later on, like some researchers looked at the data and they found out that those sounds were actually big schools of herring farting that resembles like I guess sounds from submarines. And there's some fish that we actually don't know how they produce sound. During my PhD, I identified sound from the lingcod in BC. And surprisingly, like lingcods, like they don't have swim bladders. So they don't produce it with swim bladders, and we actually don't know uh, that fish produces sound. So there's still lots of things to discover. As I said, my research was mostly trying to assign like a specific species to some specific sounds. So we can basically, once we have identified that, we have kind of built on this catalog of fish sounds. And when we hear now a sound, we can say, okay, this is lingcod, this species of rockfish, and so forth. And basically, we can use that to monitor where the fish are. Right now, I think one of the a key interest in British Columbia, for example, would be to monitor rockfish conservation areas. One, like there's several species of rockfish in British Columbia, and some of them are threatened. And there are, I think, 164 rockfish conservation areas in BC. So those areas are kind of areas where there's some restricted fishing activities, and the goal is kind of to protect the population and make the population grow again. But it's hard to know how efficient those areas are because it's hard to monitor them throughout the year. So now it's done by several means, but like diving surveys and ROVs and things like that. But it's hard to monitor them. So the idea is that if we use acoustics, that could help kind of link the dots between those two surveys that they're doing and try to see what's going on in between. Putting acoustic recorders in the water has become fairly inexpensive. You can record for continuously for several months or even several years. So you can put hydrophones at places of interest and collect data there. And once you retrieve it, then the data, then you can look through it and then identify the sounds from the species we have identified and say, okay, at this time of year, there was a peak of a presence of quillback rockfish, for example. And with this, we kind of have a better understanding of like how the presence of different fish evolve in time and in space, and try to have a better monitoring tool for managing certain fish populations. So now it's only one piece of the puzzle. Knowing that some species of fish are present in the area is important, but at the end, it will be also quite critical to try to estimate how many fish are around. And that's something we're kind of a follow-up of the research I've been doing is try to, can we use acoustics as well, just listening to the ocean to to estimate how many fishes were producing those sounds. That's obviously quite tricky, but I believe there are some ways to do it. And we're definitely not there yet, but I think that would be kind of the next chapter of this research that will hopefully make like passive acoustics like one of the like very usable tools that can help manage like some fish populations.
So it's not just marine mammals that depend on sound for communication. All ocean creatures are affected by sound and vibration. Impacts on marine life include disruption of behavior, masking of sound transmission and reception, and temporary or permanent hearing loss. One organization working to bring awareness to the implications of ocean noise is Vancouver Island's Marine Education and Research Society, with their Ocean Voices campaign. Ocean Voices is a solutions-based educational campaign that provides insight into the importance of sound to marine mammals and how members of the public are empowered to reduce ocean noise. Marine Education and Research Society have a number of suggestions to help the public reduce their impact on ocean noise, including boaters giving marine mammals space. The further away vessels are, the less the impacts there are from noise. Boaters slowing down. Often when boats slow down, the motor noise is reduced. Boaters maintaining their vessels. Having well-running engines and propellers can produce less noise. Clean hulls can reduce drag, allowing the boat to move through the water more efficiently and with less resistance. Consumers shopping locally. Tankers and cargo ships greatly contribute to ocean noise. Shopping locally means less goods traveling through our waters from overseas. People caring and sharing. The more folks who know about the impacts of ocean noise, the better. Tell friends and share online information about ocean noise, and check out mersociety.org for more. Ocean Voices recently released 2 animated videos highlighting the ways sound impacts ocean species, which can be seen on their YouTube channel. Thanks to those who are tirelessly working to help fellow living creatures, who have to hear humans but can't speak up for themselves.